Hello, and thank you for tuning into Planet in Focus 2020, our first ever virtual edition. My name is Julian Carrington, and I'm a programmer with the festival, and I very much hope you enjoyed our presentation of the viewing booth. If your reaction is anything like mine following my first viewing of the film, you're very much going to be in the mood for some further discussion. And thankfully, we're very lucky to be joined for Q&A by the film's director, Ra'anan Alexandrowicz. Ra'anan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. I was very, very happy to bring the film to a film festival that focuses on environmental issues. I was very excited to get the invitation, and that's because I feel that the film is a film that can be discussed as a film that discusses environment, in the sense that media or images are an environment that is very fast changing and that affects our lives very strongly. And I think that it should be discussed in a way, in the same kind of way that other environmental issues are discussed. So I'm really happy to have this conversation.
Well, thank you again for being with us. To start, I mean, this is just such a fascinating and original concept, and I'm curious, what was the genesis of it? How did it come about?
This is a process of a few years. I think it, in a way, it connects to my previous film, The Law in These Parts, and over the which is a film that actually also has to do with the Israeli occupation, the post-1967 occupation in Palestine. And but it's a very different film, and it's more traditional in its approach to the subject, and it's a film that describes the quote-unquote legal and justice mechanism of the occupation. Now, when I made that film with the motivation of exposing political issues, exposing the mechanism of the occupation, appealing to viewers that it was important for me to show them these things to change their minds. And as the film was released and it had some success, I felt that I was doing really the right thing, or the thing that I set out to do. But as time passed, I started to have doubts about what was the real effect of this work in the world, and in fact, what was the real effect in the world of earlier work that I've done on this subject, or other work that was done on the issue of Palestine and Israel. And the more the question grew, the less I had answer, and it became a more general question of what really happens with nonfiction images when we release them to the people who view them, or when we try to change reality with them. And of course, I couldn't find answers, because it's really an impossible question to answer, but it did push me to sort of start looking more and more at the reception of these images, rather than at the work itself, and trying to analyze different work and what it does. And that was somehow how I began this process of turning the camera around 180 degrees, if you will, and trying to point it at the viewer and at the viewing experience, and understanding something about that. So that's really how this thing began. And then I had a few iterations of it, quite a few, I would call them exercises or etudes, trying to find the way in which I can use the documentary methods to explore this and to portray this. And the viewing booth actually came out of one of these instances. I put out this open call at Temple University in Philadelphia, where I live now, asking people who care about Israel and who are interested in who watch videos to come and participate in a film viewing of videos. And the title that I gave this thing was The Meaning. I wanted to see what meaning people will attribute to these images, and that was really how the viewing booth began.
And you've said elsewhere that you don't necessarily consider this to be a film, primarily about the occupation, but was there a reason that you chose that to be the source of the subject matter? Was it just because you are obviously very familiar with that as a frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in these earlier iterations that I spoke about, I sometimes did work with this subject matter and sometimes with other subject matter, um, but the reason that I chose these images is that these are images that are very important to me, that are very dear to me, images which really should be changing the world as far as I see them. Images that I feel that I know what they mean, I know the reality in which they're filmed, and they are. This is different than documentary. The videos of the film are different than documentary films, which is what I make. But I've also held a camera as an activist before,
Mm.
and I do feel that it's really part of the same family, and that in a way, um, um, the work of citizens, the work of people who are victims, the work that they do with cameras, um, whatever we call it today, citizen journalism or participatory work. But I'm speaking about the work that people who live a certain reality do as they document it. I really feel that in a way it's the forefront of the nonfiction realm today.
Mm.
So in many reasons, these images were very important to me. There was also a big risk making the film. Will I be betraying these images? As the film moved more and more into a place where it was documenting um, views that are far from my views on these
Mm.
images, and
Mhm.
views that I have to not sort of push back against because of the way that I'm making the film and because of what I'm looking at in the film. I did have serious concerns of, will I be betraying these images
Mm.
by making this kind of use with them.
Mm. But that makes sense. That you know, this is subject matter that you have sort of personal firsthand familiarity with, which I suppose um, is important in the exercise that you've set up to, I think, to kind of ground it in. Um, you know, if you were choosing images about perhaps some other polarized issue, but one that you didn't have that firsthand reality, that firsthand experience of, yeah, I can see how you might have felt less able to. Um, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, but just the role that you play in this process. It's not an experiment, but it is, as you say, sort of an exercise. And I think there is an element there of needing to kind of have that verified perspective, perhaps, if that makes sense. And probably not.
Oh, it makes. I mean, I also usually search for the words to say what you're saying, but the meaning. I really. I think you're totally on the mark here because I, I'll say a little anecdote. After being already in the process of making the viewing booth, I did living in America and seeing as that at this time, first person documentation of reality in America plays such a big part of shaping political reality.
Mm.
I did actually start a process of a second iteration of taking um, images that have to do with the violent interactions between law enforcement and citizens in the
Mm.
U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Images from all different areas of the palette, and I did some research about that, and I was thinking of starting a second iteration of the viewing booth, and then I realized that this is really not my film to make.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And which speaks exactly to your point. I felt it viscerally as I started. I mean, it was obviously very interesting and very powerful and kind of scary for me.
Mm.
But I really felt that this was not mine. This is, and in a way, in my fantasy that can never come true, I would see further iterations of this project um, done by other filmmakers or image
Mm.
makers or
Mm-hmm.
activists or people who are invested in trying to communicate
Mm.
ideas to
Mm-hmm.
to to the public, so they know what images they are the images that are important for them, and they usually also know what audience is important for them. For me,
Mm.
Maya, what Maya represents in the film is not, not an American Jewish woman, or a young Jewish woman, or a young woman, or what she represents in the film. And I kind of said there, she represents the audience that I was interested in with previous films that I've made. Someone who really doesn't see the world like me, but is a sharp, critical viewer, a viewer that doesn't turn away from images, but rather negotiates them. So this is really the kind of viewer that I would have been searching for.
Mm.
Um, and so I imagine that if other makers with other images would do this kind of thing with other viewers, other questions would come up. So the viewing booth brings up certain questions, but other questions would come up in other iterations. I wish that would happen. Maybe one
Mm.
day it will happen, to see what that can lead to.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to make this a sort of open source project where different filmmakers could perhaps borrow the format and point their cameras or choose footage that is explores issues that are of unique importance to them. But on the topic of Maya and sort of discovering her through this process, was it always your hope that this process would reveal someone like her, i.e., would reveal to you the exact sort of person you would hope to address your films towards?
No, so as I sort of hinted to before, but also if you look at the film, it's made really with very minimal resources, and it really, when I was filming that exercise called The Meaning, I really did not see it filming. So obviously the answer to all these questions is no. I didn't think of it in that way, but I can say that I did design the open call towards audience that would be more conservative, also in terms of where I went to invite people, what courses I went into to speak to students. And I was more in and yet not only people with a conservative frame of mind about the occupation came, but this was really what interested me. This is what the thing that I thought I should understand better.
Mm.
And really I feel that many image makers, they would be good for us as a community of image makers to really be able to know a little bit of what the less immediate audience thinks. So it's not really the conversation that we have, when we screen the film at festivals, for instance, but really when the images go like further than that. What I think is called in our community beyond the choir.
Mm-hmm.
So I was definitely interested in that. But the way Maya arrived, just again another anecdote, Maya actually did not respond to the open call, and she. But in the midst of filming, we received a text from her saying that she heard about it from someone else who participated, and she would be interested in doing it as well. And someone else called and said that she won't be able to make it. So we had a slot for Maya, and then she came, and finally she became the film. Again, not immediately, because after filming, I started editing comparatively. How do different people look at the same image, which is also interesting. But listening to Maya and going over her footage, I suddenly said, oh, okay, there is an opportunity here, which I hadn't thought of. And this is an opportunity to engage with the way a viewer that I'm seeking views images, and to go deeply into that and to really paint a deep portrait of that. And I don't regret that this is the way that it went, but that, of course, it's a valid critique of the film that comes up many times. Why not other people? Why only this perspective? But again, this is not. Even though the film has this look of an experiment, this is not an experiment. This doesn't produce data.
Right.
It's more of a case study. But I think it's a case study that we definitely should be engaging with.
So was it always the intention? I think there were 7 participants that you originally filmed with. Is that right? Was it always the intention to hone in on one of them, and then it happened to be Maya, or was the original concept to look at a number of people?
The original concept was to look at a number of people. That's also how I started editing, and also this idea of asking someone to come back and further investigate the way they are viewing was not in the original plan. I mean, there was no big plan, but it wasn't there yet. So that really came up during that period between the first and second sessions.
Mm. And you were saying earlier that Maya became, you sort of recognized in her the precise audience that you are hoping to reach, somebody who is beyond the choir, who is coming from a different point of view, but who is open to the conversation, who doesn't turn away. Can you maybe say a bit more about why Maya is sort of this almost perfect viewer for you?
Yes, I would. It would be really sort of agreeing with what you said now. I think the fact that she is, as I said, she's not in the choir. She's not in the choir in my church. She thinks differently, but at the same time, she is candid about her feelings. She's willing to question herself, at least on certain levels. So I don't know if you noticed, for instance, that sometimes she sort of doubles back and said, "Okay, I thought this before, but now I realize this."
Yeah.
Or what even interested me more is that the number of videos which she chose that were actually put on the web by her political side, either if it's by the Israeli military or by organizations that are kind of more conservative. She did not immediately go with that, but rather doubted that as well. So that kind of destroys the easy theory of, okay, if it has the right logo on it, people believe, and if it doesn't have the right logo on it, people, or if it has the other side's logo on it, people don't believe. I guess it's more complicated than that. And Maya, with her openness and her candidness, was able to display this and to sort of reflect this to myself and to the audience. And in fact, the Hebrew title of the film is Mirror, because it is, I feel it's a reflection both for audiences who are willing to sort of problematize this idea of how we consume images, and also for makers or for people who do advocacy. So yeah.
Yeah, I think as you were just describing, Maya is such a compelling screen presence, well, for a number of reasons, but also because she is willing to be critical of everything that she's viewing. And yet, I wonder whether, it's funny, the first time I saw the film, I was struck by this sense that we've been trained to be critical viewers of media. We're told to be, conscious of where our media is being produced and what point of views might be animating it, and to, be alive to the possibility of manipulation and other forms of distortion. And at the same time, we're now in an era where people will reflexively dismiss something as fake news. And so I wonder whether there's this danger that being a critical viewer in this day and age can easily, you can almost become a nihilistic viewer, where you can be sort of too alive or almost too paranoid as to the potential artifice of anything that you're viewing. Is that something that has occurred to you?
Yeah, that is maybe the most important point. And that's also the kind of environmental thing that I'm talking about, that we should really be addressing, because I have learned a lot from Maya about my own blind spots, biases, And she allowed me to reflect on the media environment that I am in, not only as a person who manufactures images, but also as a person who consumes images. There's a film that I saw at True False. I don't know if you saw it, called The Faculties. It was an
No,
Argentinian film.
unfortunately not.
It was about a totally different subject. It was about students in university in Argentina, but there was a moment there that caught my attention. There is a economics professor in a lecture who says to his students, the economic crisis that hit this country in, I don't remember if it's 2000 or 2001, but 20 years ago, the economic crisis that hit us 20 years ago didn't change one letter of the way economics is studied in this faculty. And when I heard that sentence, I thought my paradigms about how images work and how people consume images were formed in another era. And a lot of my colleagues, I mean, of course, there are people from, younger generations working. So, but I think that generally, if you look at the system of creating documentaries, advocating with images, it also seems that we're working in a tradition that was really very, very instrumental in the second half of the 20th century. And we know, because we know the images and we know what changes images made. So not to undermine that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we do have to realize that perhaps the situation is different, and we should understand, we should have maybe different paradigms too. And the only thing I can come up with, because naturally I don't have any solution for that, but the only thing that I can come up with kind of as a result of what happened in the viewing booth is maybe thinking of the way images work more as a two-way street than rather a one-way street. So the viewing booth is a film about a breakdown of communication, but it also, within its process, it became some form of a dialogue. And I know that for many audiences, and they are in some sort of a dialogue with Maya. Also because the film is relatively kind of like loose in terms of its narration, its mediation. So it kind of allows you to question yourself, to question her. So that is what I don't even want to say think. That is what I feel. I'm looking for perhaps some way of seeing something that's more of a dialogue between the makers and viewers of images, in order to pass this moment of doubt, in order to move away from this moment where instead of inherent belief in images, we have inherent doubt in nonfiction images. I really think that the portrayal of the world in nonfiction form is really a human resource. It's a new human resource. It's a young human resource, but it's a resource that we see now that is fragile, and we should, hopefully, can find a way to protect it.
I mean, that's to say nothing of the coming era of deepfakes, etc., which if we're already verging into inherent doubt, what is that going to do? But that's a whole other conversation. There are two sets of responses that I'm very curious about to your film. I'm wondering, have you had responses from audiences that have surprised you or further added nuance to your thinking on your experience making the film? I understand that this is the film still making its way into the world. You maybe haven't screened at as many festivals as in a typical year, but I hope you still had an opportunity to get some feedback from audiences. And the other sort of constituency I'm very curious about is your colleagues, other filmmakers. So can you maybe speak to the responses from each of those groups?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And these are two separate realms in terms of how easy or difficult it is to take the temperature. With audiences, I think the most interesting thing to speak about is that, one, I during the making of the film already, I realized that this was the first work that I had done that's intentionally aimed at audiences that are like-minded to me, or kind of more liberal audiences.
Mm.
If before I was trying to do work that would hopefully somehow reach beyond the choir, now I really thought that I really don't know what the people beyond the choir will make of this. But I do hope that the people that are, have the same goals and same ideas as me would find the film a useful tool to start conversation about it. And here I encounter two very opposed reactions that are also, that I can't even, I can't sort of draw a line and say these people think that, these people think that. But some people do not accept the film, and many times the way they would frame it is that they just don't accept Maya as a person that can teach them something.
Mm.
And this can be something that I heard from festival, from festival directors. Who is she that we should listen to her?
Mm.
And I heard that from audiences as well. I wouldn't say that it's a majority of audience, but I did hear that. And what's interesting about it is it reflects the film, because in a way what Maya does with the images, which is kind of trying to sort of reframe them or push them away, rather than really, in effort to sometimes negotiate or even step aside from what's really in the image. I felt that sometimes people react to the film like that by saying, okay, she's not really a valid person for me to learn from, about viewing from. And that's but and then there's definitely, of course, a lot of moving responses that sort of lead me to feel that the film is doing what I really wanted it to do, to problematize a non-problem, to make visible something that's there but not really visible to people, and to make people sort of question themselves as viewers. Within the film community, it's more tricky because, as you know, it's a very polite community.
Mm.
and so you're more inclined to hear the people who support you,
Mm.
and said, yes, this is so, these are questions that we're asking ourselves. This film, and I've been hearing that a lot, this film really, it's like I've been waiting to think this. And but I also think that also in the world of colleagues, there must be people who sort of say, hey, no, this is just not the right way to question this, or this doesn't need questioning. But then, of course, within the behavior of colleagues, I think that I would usually hear that more as silence than rather than critique.
Got it. Okay. Well, we do also have a panel discussion coming up where we'll have a few additional filmmakers with whom we can delve further into this. So if you're watching this Q&A now and you're interested in the viewing booth and further conversation, I do very much urge you to tune into that as well. Maybe just by way of wrapping up this conversation, I recall I read an interview that you did on the film where you talked about showing it to some of the Palestinians who'd actually filmed the videos, the Betrayal videos that are in the film. And you said that they, in a strange way, almost felt optimistic about some of Maya's responses. So can you maybe just end by expanding on that?
Yeah. So connecting to what I said before, I was really worried that the film is betraying these people and their work and their activism and their courage. And Maya had already seen the film, but but towards finishing it, I went to the West Bank to show it to the people who had filmed the videos that are in it. And it was a screening. They were watching it on a laptop. I was sitting, it was, I think, 6 or 7 people sort of looking at the film on a laptop. I was sitting on the other side looking at them, very worried. Uh, and and as they started engaging, I understood that, okay, they, no, this doesn't seem to them to be a betrayal. They were very fascinated with Maya. It wasn't that they were optimistic by her responses. They weren't so interested in her responses. They were looking at how she watches, because what I didn't take into consideration is that all her doubts is something that they have heard many times. They live with a constant, they're constantly questioned, like, why are you here with a camera? I live here. It's my home. Have you set this up? Did you pay someone? Did you? They've heard all this. What was fascinating for them is to see her negotiating with it. And they felt, and then they said that they didn't say they're optimistic about her responses, but they said they're optimistic about her. And they said, oh, we don't have a doubt that she will change her mind. And when they met her at the first screening, they invited her to one day come to see their lives, not as mediated by camera, but just to be there and see it. So again, I don't think, I mean, the film doesn't give a lot of, there's not a lot of text in the film that can make one optimistic about neither the political divide nor the consumption of images along the lines of political divide. But maybe the process of starting to, deconstruct that and starting to create dialogue around that, maybe that is some sort of path forward.
Okay, well, I think perhaps that's a good note to leave it on, because I agree, it's not necessarily an optimistic film in some regards, but it's certainly a candid one in many senses. And so if there's a path forward, perhaps in Maya, then yeah, that's a great note on which to leave it. Ra'anan, thank you so much for your time and for the film, and we thank everybody as well for tuning into Planet in Focus, and we will see you perhaps on another Q&A or another panel. Thank you again.
Thank you.